Thanks so much, Joy, for being here. Just for everyone to know, so Joy is a CFP professional and licensed therapist who works at the intersection of money and meaning. She helps ultra high net worth individuals and financial advisors navigate the emotional, relational, and identity driven aspects of money to create clarity, connection, and lasting impact. She started the Arcadia P4P chapter in 2022, and with a group of alumni, community members, and faculty, has developed a four-prong approach to solving unpaid internships at Arcadia University. Welcome, Joy.
Thanks. So great to be with you all. Excited to share what we've learned, and 15 minutes I'll give high-level overview and go a little bit deeper where you all are most interested. And if there's stuff you want to learn more about, maybe we can talk about coming back for another advocacy alliance to talk more about it. So note if there's anything you want to learn more about. So we started this chapter 3 years ago and brought together a bunch of community stakeholders, and through that decided on 4 pillars, which I just want to share with you. And basically we were like, no one thing is going to solve this. So we feel like there's 4 areas where our effort is going to be most impactful. One is trying to create placements where sites are supported and students are paid. So like within the community, how do we get sites creating placements? Second one is obtaining SAMHSA grant money to fund student stipends. You can imagine that's evolved a little bit with the current way grants currently are working. A third is develop a $10 million endowment that funds stipends for perpetuity, because that's what'll like solve this for forever, essentially. And then the fourth one is influencing state and local governments to allocate funding to paid placements. So our approach has been like, we've got these 4 pillars, we move forward where we can, and sometimes, progress stalls in one pillar, so we're moving forward in another pillar. So we've kind of like incrementally been inching forward with each of the pillars in ways that surprise me. Like, I can't believe 3 years from now, 3 years out, like where we are. So I'm going to like dive deeper into this piece about endowments. So, my background working in finance for 20 years before I made this career change, like I understand money and endowments in ways that, frankly, a lot of people don't, much less people in the mental health field. And so that made it easier for us to, certainly an element of privilege that made it easier for us to figure this out. And so we partnered with the head of fundraising at Arcadia, and she was very supportive, actually. And later she gave us feedback on like what kind of won her over to our cause was that we came from a position of collaboration. Like, how can we do this together? We didn't come demanding. And she said that was really that was meaningful for her, because everyone's coming to her asking her to raise money and be like the genie in the bottle to just poof, deliver money. And so she appreciated our collaboration. So I'll just share that with you all. Hopefully that's helpful as you're thinking about this. So I did some back of the envelope estimating about what we would need for an endowment to solve this problem. And it turned out to be, it lined up with her numbers. And so from that, I've created a spreadsheet for you all that you can use to estimate how much money would you need to solve this problem in perpetuity. So let me just like pause a second, because there's a lot of avenues I can go here. Like, I can walk you through the spreadsheet, how you can use it to create your number for your school. That would be an option. I could talk about like how we got the support of the administration to go after this endowment. I could talk about like what we're doing to actually raise money and stuff like that. But I can talk about any other things as well. So let me just like pause, come off mute, and let me know like what specific pieces about this are you most interested in hearing? And if no one speaks, I'm just going to talk about whatever I feel like. So, but you get to tell me what you'd like me to talk about.
I definitely invite anyone else who has thoughts, but I feel like speaking to some of how to get administration invested would be really helpful, because I know that can be a challenge at a lot of universities.
Yeah. Okay. We'll definitely do that. Anyone else have some thoughts about where they'd like me to focus the time?
I think personally all of the above, if possible. But I also want to know like what you're doing now that you have this amazing spreadsheet, like what is happening. So if you could
Okay.
touch on that.
Sure. So anyone else have thoughts on where they'd like me to go deeper?
I was just going to mention I'm not great with like numbers and math and spreadsheets, and so any kind of cursory overview of what that looks
Okay,
like would
great.
be helpful for.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So I'll touch on each of those kind of sequentially. So getting the support of the administration. Now we have, it sounds like it much easier than some of the other chapters because Arcadia has been very, very open that they are trying to eliminate obstacles for people with marginalized identities in the entire university, not just in the counseling program. So we have that. And the president has a multi-year strategy around this that he holds every department accountable for. So like when we were making our pitch for administration, we went through that plan and we tied what we're trying to do, like tied it to the president's initiatives, so that we're using their language. A couple things that was really instrumental for us is through like networks of networks, someone in our group knew someone who was a trustee at Arcadia. So we got them to help us set up a meeting with a trustee. And we told the trustee what we were doing. She was really supportive. And she gave, and we're asking her, like, we don't really know how to navigate the political environment of universities. Like, what advice do you have? And she was the one who told us, like, don't go in combative. Like, they're very used to students coming in and telling them, here's what you're doing wrong. You need to fix it. Like, come from a place of collaboration, and they're probably going to want to work with you, especially on this issue. So, and she offered to set up a meeting for us with the provost. So I was like, okay, great. So we met with the provost, and he was supportive. He'd been the dean of a journalism school at American University, and they'd had to address this issue with journalism students. Like internships were unpaid, and with American University, they worked to get paid internships for the journalism students. So he like got it, and we're like, okay, this is amazing. And then he suggested we meet with the head of the fundraising and also the dean of the college. So, and he set that up, and we met with them as well, and they were supportive. And so we got like a shout out, you know, at the university level. We've gotten some shout outs about it. They're very supportive of this. And the provost, his position was like, we need to solve this for all the students at university, in the university. We can't do that immediately. Like, you all start with this and help, and let's figure out how to do it here. And then maybe we can spread it beyond, because they have a big physical therapy program, for example, and they have a teaching program. So lots of programs where there's unpaid internships. So that was really helpful and like kind of gave us energy for moving forward, that like, all right, we've got support here. We just got to figure out how to do it. So they set up, you know, introduced us to the head of fundraising. Our first meeting honestly didn't go very well. I feel like we kind of rubbed her the wrong way. But then somebody else, like maybe like a year later, we met with her again. That meeting went way better. And she's like in it. She's like, yeah, honestly, she's kind of like, this is why I work in fundraising for universities, to solve like real problems like this. So she was, and she knows fundraising. So she kind of laid out for us, here's what we can do, how we can do this. And so we got a spotlight on Giving Tuesday last year. There were some snafus that did not go as well as we'd hoped, but we raised $12,000. So that was our, you know, a start. We decided to set aside half of that for our endowment. So we got to start somewhere. And the other half we used to pay out as relief aid for students in this coming school year. And we've picked 3 students. There was some other money as well. So 3 students are each getting, I think, $3,000 this year in some relief, which obviously is not enough, but it's something. And we're also going to use them and their stories to help highlight this, to try to help with further fundraising. So that's kind of how we've like navigated the university, and really trying to partner with them. Then piece about how we got to the number, and then Pilar, you asked like, what are we doing now? Okay, so how we got to the number and the spreadsheet. So how we got to the number, I want to share with you the spreadsheet. So let's see. All right, so I've got this spreadsheet. It's a template. This page here tells you step by step what you need to do. Just like 3 things, and I'll show you that. And then I'm also explaining the underlying assumptions, so that if you share this with someone who is a math person, hopefully they'll be able to follow along and understand what I actually did. And I have a spreadsheet that's one tab that's titled the math. This is like the actual math, and there's formulas in there you can go in and look at. But that's for like people who really want to understand the math. I'm trying to make this as user-friendly as possible. So all you need to do is on the inputs tab, type in the name of your program. Like, all right, so we're Arcadia. How much are you hoping to pay students per hour for their work? So let's just say in today's dollars, like let's say somebody throw out a number. How much are you hoping to pay your students?
$25.
25. All right, love it. And then how many hours are required for the internship?
900.
What did you say?
Yeah, go for 12. Yeah.
1,200?
Yeah, in
Okay.
Boston.
How many students are completing fieldwork in a year? Like at a program, just like at your at Boston program, for example, how many students?
About 900.
900?
Yeah, because there are multiple off-campus programs online.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's wild.
hold on to your wigs, folks. This is going to be a huge number, but we'll do it. Okay.
Oh,
So
and hold on. And Aiden put a question. Is it 1,200 per year? No, it's 1,200 hours over 2 years. But so you want to do this per year, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So let's just say in the first year it's 480, 480. Yeah.
480 hours. Okay. So this would be the total hours, yeah, for a student. All right, so we need $250 million to solve this. It's a big number, $364 million. It's a lot of money, but this helps you with understanding like what you actually need. So what's also helpful with this is like where it does show like maybe we can't just solve this with endowment alone, right? Which is where getting paid place, like that's why we have our 4 pillars. Like how do we get the community to create paid placements, which some folks were sharing, you know, Cindy was sharing like what you all did, like the preference thing and getting more created that way. Grants, maybe in the future when federal money is allocated toward mental health again, and legislation as well, right? And I know there's a lot of work P4P has done around that, right? But this at least helps you understand like what is the size we're talking about. So let me show you like for Arcadia. For Arcadia, it's a small program. There's 17 people. Oops, wait, sorry. 600 hours, and there's 17 people. So it's a much smaller number, like $8.5 million, which feels a bit more manageable than $1/3 billion. And I have this program so that you can just type it in like this, and then yeah, there's all the math on the back end, but hopefully this is all you have to actually do to get to the number. So let me pause. Like any questions about the spreadsheet here? Yes, Pilar.
Okay. So why does it say 100 years? My first question.
Because of the math, essentially. And so I'm thinking like, I'm thinking like, I want to do it in perpetuity, but I can't do a math problem that truly is infinite, or like that number would just be astronomical. So it's like, I'd like to think that 100 years from now, the world is very different and this problem is solved. I guess that's kind of how I'm thinking about it too. But like 100 years is a long time. We could make it shorter if you feel like we want to solve that faster. I could change it.
Oh, no, I was just wondering, I know because you had mentioned when we spoke that like after you get the endowment, part of the money, like what percentage of the money goes to student and what percent, what percent of money
Yeah.
makes interest to keep on being part of the endowment.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then my other question before I forget, let's say like in Amy's case, like the first year they have to do 400 hours, but maybe then the second year, like their programs were maybe the first year they don't do any hours, but the second year they do other hours. Like, how would you do if every year required a different amount of hours, depending on if you're a full-time or part-time student, then how would you be able to do this?
Okay. So how I would do that is you want to net out for a given year. So what you'd want to do is like if in year 1, let's say you have 10, I'm going to use small numbers, 10 numbers, 10 students have to do 400 hours. In year 2, you can have, let's say, another 10 students who have to do what, 600 hours? Just can we use easy round numbers? So what that means is that in 1 year, you're going to have some people going through year 1 and some people going through year 2. So you would really, let's see, how would you do that? So it would be 20 students in total, and then you could just average the number of hours, which would be 500, but I'll just do the average. Oops, wrong way. Boop. Here we go. Ah, this is what happens when you try to do public math or public. There we go. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's just 500 hours. That is the average. It's 500 hours, between 400 and 600. So then you could just do, and then you tally this up. So it would be, you would put in 500 hours is the average, 20 students, and that would give you the number that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I would add that, like, for the instructions for programs that do have that, like maybe as a feedback.
Okay, cool. Let me just make a note. Add these instructions. Right. Yes, Aiden.
Yeah, so you don't have to go into all the details if it's like too much, but the math, is it basically accounting for like, could you give us a high level view of
Yeah.
what the math is to get to that number?
Yeah. So this assumes that $25 today, we increase that amount every year by inflation. On average, inflation is 3%. Yes, a few years ago it was 10%, but other times it's like 0.5%. So it averages out to about 3% a year. So we're assuming that they get an inflation adjustment every year. So that way, 20 years from now, you know, when $25 an hour is like $5 an hour, then we're not in that problem like we are today with the push for $15 minimum wage. So it accounts for an inflation adjustment. It also assumes that with it, when you have an endowment, you can only spend 4% of it a year in order for the endowment to keep growing, right? So let's say we have an endowment of $100,000. You can spend 4% a year. That's $4,000, which is not very much money. But that's because the other $96,000 needs to stay invested that it can continue growing and producing, growing for future, for the following year. And so you kind of assume that in an investment grows 7% a year. So 4% of that you get to pay out, 3% gets readjusted for that inflation adjustment, so that the endowment continues growing with inflation. So that's how you kind of keep up with inflation. So that is that is how the math works. So then it ends up like you have this ridiculously big number at the bottom. You're figuring out like, well, what is the math actually need? But it's assuming 4% of that you're only spending 4% a year from the endowment. And that's just like a rule of thumb that's used in finance, and every endowment follows that rule that they don't pay out more than 4%. They might have slightly different numbers in their rules, but it's generally around that. Does that answer your question, Eden?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And Pilar, does that get to your question too? Because you were wondering like how we got to the numbers.
Yes, but now I have a follow-up question, if you
Sure,
don't
go for
mind.
it.
So I don't work at a school, so I'm not sure. When we're talking about the endowment making interest, right? Are how like you're putting it in the bank, but are you putting it in a certain type of account for the endowment to make the most interest possible, and it's at the same time also be safe in case like the worst happens?
Yeah, so the university, so how this typically works with endowments, whether it's like in nonprofit world, the university has a board who's specifically responsible for overseeing the endowment. And universities are tax exempt, so they don't get taxed on the growth of the endowment. And the trustees or the board members overseeing the endowment, they are responsible for how it's invested. And there's normally a document that guides how it gets invested. So we, as this part of P4P, we don't really have anything to do with how it's invested. It's the university's investment guidelines that determine how it's invested. And it is typically invested in a mix of equity investments and bond investments, and like, which is like, equities are to grow, bonds are for stability and security, and with the goal overall being that it grows around, they're targeting like 7% a year growth. And so like with Arcadia, we are starting, this is like a pool of money set aside just for this program. And there's a document outlining this, and it specifically says that this will be invested in accordance with the guidelines of the overall university endowment, which really reduces a ton of risk for us that we are not the investment managers on it. And I would advise you do not want that responsibility. It has a ton of legal and fiduciary risk involved. And so like you really want them to just manage it, but that your program gets the money, or the students in your program get the money. Does that answer your question, Pilar?
It does. Personally, I would still want to oversee everything, like the legal side. Actually, now the other question,
Yeah.
and please, people, do not feel shy because I'm taking up all these questions. But how do you make sure, right? You mentioned the legality of this. How do you make sure that the money stays with the program and doesn't go back to the full university main endowment?
Mm-hmm. So there is a document that outlines this. And the document that we agreed to says that it says that it's separate, and it says it's to be used for the students of this program, and here's who meets the criteria, right? And the head of Bridget, the head of the alumni fundraising, she gave us a lot of guidance. She's like, remember, the terms we use today are different than what's going to be used 20, 30, 40 years from now. And so she guided us on how to write this so that it makes sense and somebody 50 years from now can honor the intent that we have without like pigeonholing them into stuff that doesn't resonate any longer. And also avoid, pigeonholing us into offensive statements. Because remember, 50 years ago, calling people of color colored was like the progressive thing to do, and now we consider that offensive, right? And so like she guided us on how to navigate that. She also, a part of that, so it says that this will go to students of this program. Here's the criteria, and we made it needs-based, in part to account for the broader environment and avoid opening this up to litigation, that this is like financial needs-based is who should be prioritized for the funds from this. And then also says in there's a clause that if the program shuts down, like the counseling program shuts down and there's no more students in there, then this will go into the broader university endowment. So that's how we addressed it. And when you set this up, like you'll get to, chat with your folks that hopefully they'll be open to your input. You can chat with it and like shape it and stuff. And this was the guidance that she gave us around this to really help us honor the intent of what we have around this. Other questions about the spreadsheet or the math? And Cindy, I know you said you're not a math person, so I want to give you plenty of time to get your questions answered.
No. This is helpful. Just that the fact that there are formulas here, I can plug in numbers. That is all I can manage at the moment. But thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Great. Awesome. So Pilar, you also asked about what are we doing now? So our university required $50,000 as an anchor investment in order to start a fund that's separate from the rest of the university endowment. So we'd raised the $12,000. We set $6,000 aside for this. The other half we paid out to students, and we were able to get a donor who gave the rest to get to the 50. Well, actually, they gave full 50, so we have like $56,000. So now that's why we're able to have this like set aside from the university, that we actually have this endowment now. So there's rules that like it has to be invested for 18 months before you can start paying off of it. And the donor is actually giving the $50,000 over 5 years. So it's $10,000 a year. So it's going to take time. Like this is not a quick fix by any means. And this is just $50,000 out of the like $8.5 million that we need, right? So we've got a ways to go. However, our Bridget has been super helpful, and she has said, she's like, this is a really compelling story, ask. And what she's trying to help us do is if we can get enough small dollar donations to this, then she can make the case to private foundations, like, you know, like the names that you hear funding NPR and stuff, like the so and so and so and so foundation. She said we can make the case that she will put a pitch together for them about like, hey, here's a really important issue. You can see that it matters to our community by the number of small dollar donations. However, because of this very issue, these people who are graduates do not make that much, cannot afford to donate to this. So would you be willing to lend your resources to this important issue? So that's our plan is, first we have to get a bunch of small dollar donations, which we're hoping maybe this year with Giving Tuesday, we can get that. If we can get a couple hundred, like $20 to $100 donations, then we'd like, look, it matters. And then she can use that to pitch to the such and such, you know, important person or the, you know, rich person foundation that they will they'll donate to us. So that is, and then also like as we get traction on this, she also plans on going to trustees members and of the university about like, hey, important initiative, you want to put your money behind it, put your name to it. So that is our plan to continue growing this. What other questions do you all have?
Well, and I do want to make space for us to be able to have unrecorded discussion and question and answers. So, Joy, did you have any like last thoughts before we stop the recording?
So, I mean, this is the piece about the endowment. So I was trying to be as like concise as possible with this. But as far as the endowment goes, I feel like I've given you the like nitty-gritty stuff. If you wanted to talk about other aspects of our pillar of the prongs we're working on, the different pillars, I'm happy to talk to that too. But I feel like we've gotten the high level on the endowment piece.